I recognized the car before I recognized her. A stalled sedan pulled half onto the shoulder, hazards blinking weakly through a downpour heavy enough to blur the windshield of my own truck. I'd been driving home from a job site, radio on, half my attention on the road ahead, when the flashing lights caught my eye through the sheeting rain. I pulled over out of ordinary decency, the kind of thing you do for any stranger stranded in weather like that, and only realized who I was actually looking at once she rolled down her window. Isla? She squinted through the rain, recognition arriving a beat behind mine, water already running down her face from where she'd apparently been outside checking under the hood herself. Ronan. Oh my God. Ronan Blackwell. It's been a while.
12 years at least. I can't believe you're the one who stopped.
Small world, apparently, even on a highway in the middle of nowhere. This road isn't exactly the middle of nowhere, but I appreciate the drama of the observation.
I'm Ronan Blackwell, 32, and Isla Fenwick had been the specific, defining crush of my entire sophomore year of college. Back when we'd lived 2 doors down from each other in the same dorm hallway, and I'd never once worked up the nerve to say more than a passing hello. I'd spent an embarrassing amount of that year memorizing her schedule well enough to time my own comings and goings around accidental hallway encounters. A level of quiet devotion I'd never once acted on before we both graduated and lost touch entirely.
I remembered, standing in that rain, the specific way I used to rehearse potential conversation openers in my head for weeks, only to freeze completely whenever an actual opportunity presented itself. 12 years hadn't erased the memory of that particular cowardice, even if it had apparently done nothing to prepare me for actually running into her again under circumstances neither of us could have predicted. There was one night, sophomore spring, I still remembered clearly, a hallway study session that had run late, both of us the only two people left in the common room, her working through a problem set while I pretended to read a textbook. I had no actual interest in. We'd talked for nearly an hour that night, easy and unguarded, about everything from her impossible calculus professor to my own uncertain major, both of us discovering, without either of us naming it directly, that we actually enjoyed each other's company beyond the specific novelty of a late-night coincidence. I'd walked back to my room afterward, convinced I'd finally work up the nerve to ask her out properly the following week. I never did. I spent that entire week rehearsing exactly what I'd say, standing outside her door twice with my hand raised to knock before losing my nerve both times. By the time I'd finally worked up something resembling courage, she'd started dating someone from her econ class, a genuinely nice guy named Peter, who'd apparently had none of my hesitation about actually saying something. I told myself the window had simply closed before I ever confirmed whether it had actually been open. A story I'd repeated to myself often enough over the following decade that it had calcified into something closer to fact than memory.
You're doing the thing, she said now, watching me with a small, amused expression through the rain. Going quiet and staring off somewhere. You used to do that in the dorm hallway too, if I remember correctly.
You remember that? I remember more than you'd probably expect. 12 years is a long time, but some things apparently stick. I remember wondering more than once why you never actually said anything, given how obvious it seemed you wanted to. That obvious?
Considerably obvious, Ronan. I used to hope you would, honestly, before I got tired of waiting and started seeing Peter instead.
I felt something shift at that admission, understanding for the first time in 12 years that the window I'd assumed had simply closed on its own had actually been waiting on my own nerve the entire time. I had no idea you felt that way. I wasn't exactly subtle about it, in retrospect, though I suppose neither of us were particularly good at being direct back then. Pop the hood, I told her, already reaching for the toolkit I kept behind my truck seat. Let's see what we're dealing with. I set a reflective triangle behind my truck first, well back from both vehicles, and told her to stay behind the guardrail while I actually checked the battery. Romance or not, no stranded car on a highway shoulder was worth either of us getting clipped by a passing truck in weather like that. She protested briefly, insisting she could help, before conceding the point and retreating to the safer distance I'd asked for. She did, and I spent the next 20 minutes soaked through, working under her hood while rain hammered down around us, both of us shouting occasional updates over the noise of the storm. The problem turned out to be a corroded battery terminal, nothing serious, fixable with tools I happened to be carrying, and about 15 minutes of patience.
How's it looking? She called out at one point, huddled under the meager shelter of her own car door, rain running in steady streams off the edge of the door frame.
Fixable. Corroded terminal, probably been building up for months. You're lucky it wasn't something worse, given the location. Lucky's one word for it. I was starting to genuinely panic before I saw your truck slow down. This stretch doesn't get much traffic, especially not in weather like this. You did a decent job flagging it, for the record. Hazards pulled well onto the shoulder. Better instincts than most people manage in a panic. 12 years of city driving apparently taught me something useful. The rain showed no signs of letting up, water pooling in the gravel shoulder around our feet. Both of us thoroughly soaked within the first 5 minutes, despite my best efforts to work quickly. I found myself more than once glancing up at her through the downpour, still processing the specific improbability of the exact person I'd once spent an entire year quietly hoping to run into again, appearing instead 12 years later on an empty highway in a thunderstorm.
You're a mechanic now? She asked, once the engine turned over successfully, watching me wipe grease and rainwater off my hands.
Contractor, actually. I just grew up around cars. My dad ran a shop. I closed the hood, both of us drenched and slightly breathless from the effort. Are you doing okay to drive? I can follow you somewhere if you're not confident in the fix. I think I'm fine. Thank you, genuinely. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped. Anyone would have stopped. Not everyone would have known what to do once they had. I offered her my jacket before she got back in her car, the storm still coming down hard enough that her own coat had already soaked through. She hesitated for a moment before taking it, the specific small hesitation of someone weighing a gesture that felt more significant than the practical circumstances strictly required. You don't have to do that, she said, though she was already pulling it around her shoulders. You'll be soaked the rest of your drive.
I've got a spare in the truck. Consider it evened out.
We stood there a moment longer than the situation strictly required, both of us apparently reluctant to end the encounter despite the weather, rain still hammering steadily around us, neither of us in any particular hurry to get back in our respective vehicles. I want to see you again, she said, before I could think of a reason to keep the conversation going myself. Properly, I mean, not stranded on a highway shoulder. I'd like that. There's a coffee place near downtown if that works for you.
She reached out and took my phone before I'd even fully processed the gesture, typing in her number with the specific quick efficiency of someone who'd already decided. She handed it back with a small smile.
In case you lose your nerve again.
I contain multitudes. Occasionally one of them involves actually following through, given proper motivation.
We'll see. She got back in her car, engine now running steadily, and gave me a small wave through the rain-streaked windshield before pulling back onto the highway. I stood there for a moment longer, watching her taillights disappear into the storm, feeling considerably more unsettled than a simple roadside repair should have left me.
Here's what you need to know about Isla Fenwick before anything else happens. She works in architecture now, had built a genuinely impressive career over the past decade at a mid-sized firm known for adaptive reuse projects. Work she described with visible pride during that first coffee 3 days later. She was, at the time of that rainy encounter, engaged to a man named Trent, a fact she mentioned about 10 minutes into the conversation, delivered with a carefulness that suggested she'd been debating whether to bring it up at all.
We'd met at a small cafe near her office, both of us slightly awkward in the specific way people are when reuniting after 12 years, working through the ordinary catch-up questions before the conversation found its actual footing. She told me about her career trajectory, the specific satisfaction of watching a building actually rise out of a set of drawings she'd spent months perfecting. I told her about my own path into contracting, considerably less glamorous but genuinely satisfying in its own right. I should have said something on the highway, she admitted, stirring a coffee she hadn't touched in several minutes. I'm engaged. 6 months out from the wedding, actually. I just didn't know how to work it into the conversation while you were fixing my car in a thunderstorm.
I felt something complicated settle in my chest, understanding immediately that whatever had reawakened between us in that downpour needed to be handled with considerably more care than either of us had been treating it with. Congratulations, I said, meaning it as sincerely as I could manage under the circumstances. I didn't know.
I know you didn't. I'm sorry I let the coffee happen without mentioning it sooner. You don't owe me an apology. We're old friends catching up. That's allowed, engagement or not. I appreciate you saying that. I want to be honest about something else too, though, because I don't want you thinking you're the reason anything is complicated. Long before the storm, I'd already postponed 2 venue appointments and stopped correcting people when they called the wedding. Soon. I've been taking my ring off when I'm alone in the apartment for months, telling myself it was just because it caught on things while I worked. I've thought about you more than I probably should have over the years, and some part of me wanted to see if the person I remembered actually matched who you'd become. But whatever's already been cracking in that engagement started cracking long before this afternoon. What's Trent like? Kind, stable, reliable in a way I convinced myself was exactly what I wanted after a string of considerably less reliable relationships in my 20s. She turned her coffee cup slowly, not quite meeting my eyes. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Boundary issues probably on top of everything else this reunion has apparently uncovered. You don't have to explain. I'm happy to just listen, if that's useful. It is, actually. I don't know that I've fully examined my own feelings about the engagement with anyone, honestly. My friends are all very invested in the wedding at this point. It's hard to voice doubts to people who've already bought dresses. How long have you had doubts? She considered the question seriously, longer than a simple deflection would have required. I don't know if doubts is the right word, more like a persistent, quiet sense that something's missing, that I never let myself examine too closely because Trent's genuinely a good match on paper. Stable job, wants the same things I want, treats me well. I kept telling myself that should be enough. Should being the operative word. Should being the operative word, she agreed, with a small, rueful laugh. I'm choosing not to unpack that observation too thoroughly over a single coffee with someone I haven't seen in 12 years. Fair enough. I'll leave the unpacking to your own timeline. We sat with that for a moment, both of us aware the conversation had already drifted well past ordinary catch-up territory. She asked about my own life eventually, genuinely curious rather than just deflecting, and I told her about 6 years of building a contracting business from nothing, the specific satisfaction of watching a renovation come together after months of careful planning. You seem happy, she observed, settled in a good way. Not the kind of settled I've apparently been describing about my own life. I like the work. I like that it's honest. You either did the job well or you didn't. No ambiguity to hide inside. I think I needed that clarity after years of feeling uncertain about most other things. That's a specific kind of peace I haven't found yet, apparently. I want to be clear about something important, because it matters enormously for how the rest of this story unfolds. Before we'd even finished that first coffee, I said the thing I knew I needed to say, however much I didn't want to say it. I think we should keep some distance, I told her, until you actually know what you want about Trent. I don't want to become the place you hide from a decision you haven't made yet. If there's really something here, it'll still be here once you've figured that out on your own, without me in the mix complicating it. That's a very generous thing to say, given how this afternoon's clearly gone for both of us. It's not generosity exactly. It's self-preservation, too. I don't want to spend the next year wondering if you chose me or just chose an exit. I understand. I think you're right, honestly, even though I don't love hearing it. We didn't text in the weeks that followed, not beyond a single message from me a few days later, telling her I hoped she was doing okay, and a brief, polite reply that made clear neither of us intended to push past the boundary I'd set. I threw myself into work instead, told myself the ordinary business of contracting was a considerably better use of my attention than wondering what was happening on the other end of a relationship that wasn't mine to interfere with. Those 6 weeks were harder than I expected, honestly. The specific discipline of caring about someone's decision without being allowed to influence it. I finished 2 kitchen renovations and started a third, took up running again after months of neglecting it, did everything I could think of to keep my attention pointed somewhere other than a phone that stayed quiet. My brother, catching wind of the situation during one of our regular calls, offered the same blunt advice he'd give me again later. "You did the right thing telling her to figure it out without you," he said. "Doesn't mean it doesn't feel terrible. Those two things can both be true. I keep wondering if I made the whole thing up. The connection, I mean. Maybe I just wanted it badly enough that I imagined more than was actually there. You've known this woman for over a decade, on and off, Ronan. That's not the kind of thing people typically imagine into existence over a single roadside conversation. Give her the time. Trust that it means something that she hasn't already come back for the wrong reasons." 6 weeks passed before she called.
I ended it, she said without preamble, the moment I picked up. Officially 2 days ago. I wanted you to hear it from me directly, and I wanted you to know it had nothing to do with the distance you asked for. If anything, that distance is what actually let me look at the engagement clearly, without you as a variable clouding the decision.
I felt something settle in my chest, relief and caution arriving at the same time. How did it go? About as hard as you'd expect, ending something with someone who never did anything wrong. I told him the truth, that I'd been quietly unhappy for longer than I wanted to admit, that I'd been postponing the wedding twice already for reasons I never let myself examine honestly, that I'd been taking my ring off when I was alone in the apartment for months and telling myself it was just because it caught on things.
It sounds like it had been building for a long time before any of this.
It had. I want you to understand that clearly, because I don't want either of us pretending you were the reason this ended. You were the reason I finally looked at something I'd been avoiding. That's different, and it matters to me that you know the difference.
I appreciate you telling me that directly.
He didn't take it well, she continued. Not angrily exactly, just genuinely blindsided. He kept asking what he'd done wrong, and I didn't have a satisfying answer because he hadn't actually done anything wrong. I think that made it harder, honestly. It's easier to end things with someone who's given you a clear reason. A week later, Isla asked if I could help carry a few heavier pieces of furniture to a rental van, mentioning that her sister had already spent the morning helping her pack the smaller boxes. I almost said yes immediately, then caught myself and asked whether her sister would still be there when I arrived.
I don't want Trent walking into a scene that looks worse than it actually is, I told her. If it's just going to be the two of us moving your things out of his apartment, I'd rather come by afterward for the heavy lifting, once your sister's already handled the rest.
That's thoughtful. She'll still be there, actually. I wasn't planning on doing this entirely alone regardless. I arrived to find her sister still there, exactly as promised, the three of us working through the last of the boxes together. We were nearly finished when Trent's car pulled into the driveway, apparently having come by to collect a few things of his own, unaware anyone else would be present. He got out slowly, taking in the scene, his former apartment, boxes stacked on the curb. A man he clearly recognized from Isla's account of the highway story helping carry furniture, her sister standing nearby as an obvious, deliberate buffer. I watched his expression shift through several stages in the space of a few seconds, landing somewhere between hurt and a kind of resigned understanding. "Can we talk?" he asked, his eyes moving between us with an expression I recognized immediately as genuine hurt rather than simple anger. "Alone, I mean." "Of course," I said, stepping back immediately, giving them the space the moment clearly required. I retreated to my truck, parked at the curb, and sat there uncertain what was actually being decided inside, second-guessing my decision to be present for the move at all. I waited outside for nearly 40 minutes, watching through the apartment window as their conversation grew increasingly animated, the helpless feeling of a man with no actual role in a conversation that might determine everything. At one point, I saw Trent gesture toward the window, toward me, and I looked away, uncomfortable being an unwitting prop in whatever argument was actually unfolding inside. When Isla finally came back out, her expression was drawn and tired. "I wanted one more chance," she told me, sliding into the passenger seat of my truck rather than continuing to load boxes. A real one, not just an ultimatum. He asked me to slow everything down, take a few weeks before finalizing anything, Make sure I wasn't just running toward the first exciting thing that happened to cross my path. I felt the floor shift slightly under that sentence. Is he right? Do you need that time? I don't know, Ronan. That's the honest answer. Everything's happened so fast since that storm that I genuinely can't tell anymore whether I'm choosing something real or just choosing an escape from something that had already quietly failed. Then take the time. I meant it before and I mean it now. I'd rather you be certain than rushed, even if certain takes longer than either of us wants. You're not even going to try to convince me otherwise? I don't think that's my place. If I convince you to choose me over genuinely working through whether you need more time, I'm not sure that's actually a choice you'd trust 6 months from now. I'd rather you arrive here on your own, even if it takes longer than I'd like. She didn't call me for 11 days after that conversation. 11 days of genuine uncertainty about which direction things were actually heading. I didn't reach out, respecting the space she'd asked for, even though the silence tested my patience considerably more than I expected.
I filled that stretch with ordinary work, extra hours on a renovation project that gave me something concrete to focus on, beyond the anxious spiral of checking my phone every few hours for a message that never arrived. I found myself, more than once, driving past that same stretch of highway where we'd first reconnected, an unconscious pilgrimage I didn't fully examine until my brother pointed out how many times I'd mentioned it during our calls.
I called my brother once during that stretch, needing an outside perspective on a situation that felt considerably more significant than any decision I'd made in years. You gave her space and you're sitting here torturing yourself over it, he said, once I'd explained the full situation. That's actually the right call, for what it's worth. Some things can't be rushed just because the waiting is uncomfortable.
What if she goes back to him? What if 11 days turns into the answer being no?
Then you'll know you did the right thing regardless, and you'll survive it. But I don't think that's actually where this is heading, based on how you've described her these past few weeks. People don't usually take 11 days to decide to go back to comfortable and familiar. They take 11 days to work up the nerve to choose something harder but more honest.
I hope you're right.
I usually am about this kind of thing. Try to actually sleep tonight instead of rehearsing worst-case scenarios.
She showed up at my apartment on the 12th evening, unannounced, still wearing my jacket, which she'd apparently kept far longer than a simple loan required. I opened the door to find her standing there, expression steadier than I'd seen it in weeks, none of the drawn exhaustion that had marked our last conversation.
Can I come in? Of course. We stood in my living room for a moment, both of us aware that whatever she'd come to say carried real weight.
I took the time, she said, without preamble. Real time. Not just performing consideration for Trent's benefit. I realized somewhere around day 9 that the reason I couldn't imagine going back to him wasn't really about you at all, not primarily. It was that going back would mean choosing comfortable and familiar over honest, and I'm done making that particular choice.
What made day 9 the day it clicked? I drove past our old apartment building, actually. Not intentionally, just took a wrong turn and ended up on that street. And I sat there for 20 minutes, thinking about how much of my adult life I'd spent choosing the safer, more predictable option, and how tired I was of that pattern. Trent's a genuinely good person. He deserves someone who chooses him fully, not someone who's settling because the alternative feels too uncertain. How do you feel now? Steadier than I've felt in months. Scared, still, about what comes next, but steadier. Scared of what specifically? That I've built you up into something impossible over 12 years of imagination, and the real version won't match it. That I'm trading one kind of uncertainty for another, just a more exciting one. I don't have a clean answer for either fear. I just know I'd rather face them honestly than keep avoiding the question. I want to be honest about what happened next, because it's the part of this story I've replayed most since. I reached for her hand, still resting on the sleeve of my own jacket, and the kiss that followed started careful. The particular carefulness of two people who'd just weathered something genuinely difficult together. Then it went warm, her hand finding the front of my shirt with a certainty that had taken real courage to arrive at. And then, for one long, unhurried moment, it went past warm entirely, into something that made an ordinary evening feel like exactly the right place for 12 years of missed opportunity to finally resolve itself. We broke apart to the sound of a neighbor's door closing down the hall, entirely unbothered by either of us. For the record, I said, I'm glad we found our way back to each other, storm and everything.
Best gear failure of my entire life, if we're calling a dead battery terminal a gear failure.
We took things slowly after that, exactly as we'd promised each other, both of us deliberate about building trust incrementally instead of rushing toward anything neither of us was fully ready for. We dated properly for the following year, both of us treating the relationship with the specific care two people bring to something they understand carries real weight, having already watched it cost genuine pain to arrive at. We spent that first month establishing an easy rhythm neither of us had expected to find so naturally: weekend hikes, quiet dinners at my place instead of anywhere public. Both of us in no particular hurry to introduce the relationship to friends or family until we felt genuinely solid in it ourselves. I keep waiting for this to feel complicated, Isla admitted, about 6 weeks in, both of us curled up on my couch after an ordinary Tuesday dinner. Given everything that led here, it just doesn't, though. It feels remarkably simple, which almost makes me more nervous than if it felt hard. Maybe simple is allowed to just be simple sometimes, especially after everything complicated it took to get here. I like that framing. I'm choosing to believe it, at least for tonight.
Our first actual date, distinct from 12 years of accumulated history and a rainstorm that had reopened it, happened about a month after that first kiss. Both of us slightly nervous, in a way that felt almost funny given everything we'd already been through together.
This feels strange, I admitted, picking her up properly for the first time. 12 years of knowing you, one rainstorm, one broken engagement, and I'm somehow nervous about an ordinary dinner. I feel the same, honestly. I think it's because this time we both know exactly what's actually at stake, instead of just running on adrenaline and a corroded battery terminal. We spent that first proper date laughing our way through dinner, both of us discovering, with real delight, an entirely new register of a connection that had first started 12 years earlier and never quite finished. She told me at one point about the wrong turn that had led her past our old apartment building during those 11 days, and I told her, in return, about the hallway study session I'd apparently never fully let go of either.
We were both just waiting for permission, weren't we, she said. All those years ago, and apparently again this time too.
Apparently. I'm choosing to be grateful the permission eventually arrived, even if it took a rainstorm and a broken engagement to get there. We introduced each other to our families about 3 months in, both of us waiting until the relationship felt solid enough to survive the specific scrutiny that comes with actually meeting someone's parents. My own mother, upon hearing the full story, laughed for a solid minute before composing herself.
You had a crush on this woman for an entire year in college and never said anything? She asked. And then you fixed her car in a thunderstorm a decade later and finally worked up the nerve?
12 years, technically, and yes, that's approximately what happened.
I'm delighted the universe eventually forced the issue, given how long you apparently needed the push.
Isla's own family welcomed me with similarly warm, if slightly bemused, curiosity, her father asking more questions about the actual car repair than about my intentions, apparently more interested in the mechanical details than the romantic ones. Trent, for what it's worth, eventually found someone better suited to his own needs, sending Isla a brief, gracious note once he heard about our engagement a year and a half later, admitting he'd come to understand, with some distance, that the relationship had been quietly wrong for both of them, long before either of us entered the picture.
I proposed on the same highway shoulder where we'd reconnected, on the anniversary of that storm, holding the same jacket she'd never given back. I'd planned it carefully, checking the weather forecast obsessively in the weeks leading up to the date, hoping for at least a light rain to properly close the loop, though the actual day turned out clear and sunny despite my hopes.
No rain, she observed, as I pulled the truck onto the same shoulder, considerable confusion crossing her face at the unexpected stop. Is something wrong with the truck? Nothing's wrong with the truck. Get out for a second. She did, visibly puzzled, glancing around at the same unremarkable stretch of highway that had started everything, until I produced the ring and her expression shifted entirely. This feels appropriately full circle, she said, once she'd said yes. laughing through tears on the same stretch of road where this entire story had actually started, even without the rain. I like a story that closes its own loop properly, weather permitting or not.
You planned the exact spot, of course you did.
I contain multitudes, apparently, including a surprising commitment to symbolic geography.
We got married the following spring. A small, unpretentious ceremony that neither of us wanted to make any bigger than it needed to be, held in her parents' backyard with folding chairs and string lights instead of anything more elaborate. My brother, who'd talked me through those 11 anxious days of waiting, gave a brief toast that mostly consisted of taking credit for the outcome.
I told him to be patient, he announced, glass raised. You're welcome, both of you.
You told me to try to sleep instead of spiraling, I corrected. I don't think that quite counts as strategic relationship advice.
Results matter more than the specific wording, Ronan. I'll accept the credit regardless.
Isla's college friends, several of whom had known about my quiet, unspoken crush back in our dorm days, treated the wedding as something of a long overdue vindication.
We used to joke about it, one of them told me, considerably tipsy by the reception's second hour. Whether you'd ever actually say anything, I lost money betting you wouldn't, for the record. I'm delighted to have been wrong.
I appreciate the honesty, even 12 years too late to actually collect on it.
The jacket sits framed now in our shared home, a small, permanent record of exactly how much can change in the time it takes to fix a corroded battery terminal in the rain. I think back sometimes to that hallway study session, sophomore spring, the specific version of myself who couldn't find the nerve to ask a simple question. I've often wondered what would have happened if I'd actually said something then, whether we'd have found our way to each other years earlier, or whether the timing simply wasn't right until it was. Do you ever think about it? Isla asked me once, years into the marriage. The version where you actually asked me out in college? Sometimes. I don't know if it would have worked, honestly. We were different people then. I think some part of me believes the timing actually mattered, not just the courage. That's a generous way to forgive your own cowardice. I contain multitudes, apparently, including the eventual ability to reframe 12 years of missed opportunity as good timing instead of simple fear. I'll allow the reframe. The outcome speaks for itself, regardless of how we got here. Isla's mother, during the wedding reception, brought up a memory she said she'd been saving to share once the timing felt right. She mentioned you a handful of times actually back in college, her mother told me. Some boy down the hall who was funny in a quiet way. I never thought much of it at the time. I'm glad it turned out to matter more than either of you let on back then. We still drive past that highway shoulder occasionally, on the anniversary of the storm, pulling over just long enough to remember exactly where this entire story actually started. I got to see Isla handle real pressure firsthand about a year into our marriage, when a major project at her firm hit a significant setback just weeks before a critical client presentation. I watched her navigate the crisis with the same composed determination that had first drawn me back to her during that stormy afternoon, working through the technical problems methodically instead of panicking, coordinating with her team late into several nights until the project was salvaged. You're terrifyingly calm under that kind of pressure, I told her, once the presentation had gone successfully. Panic doesn't redesign a structural element that's failed review, Ronan. Somebody has to stay steady, and it might as well be the person who actually understands the drawings.
I don't think you know how to do anything halfway.
You should see me attempt actual relaxation on vacation. I've been informed by multiple people that I'm deeply halfway on that particular front. My own contracting business grew steadily over those same years, eventually large enough that I brought on 2 additional crew members, work that kept me busy, but never once made me forget the specific gratitude of a life that had nearly stayed permanently different if a single storm hadn't rerouted both our afternoons. We keep a small framed photo beside the jacket now too, taken by a stranger at our wedding, the 2 of us laughing at something just out of frame, considerably more unguarded than either of us had learned to be during those careful, complicated first months. Do you ever think we'd have found our way back to each other eventually, storm or not? Isla asked me once, years into the marriage. I'd like to believe that. I don't actually know, though. Some things need the right accident to happen at all. I've made peace with needing the accident. I just try not to take the accident itself for granted anymore. I think about that afternoon often, honestly. The specific chain of small decisions that had to line up exactly right for any of this to happen. The job site I happened to be leaving at that exact hour. The route I happened to take instead of my usual one. The fact that I hadn't yet replaced the reflective triangle that had been sitting in my truck bed for years before I ever needed it for anything real. None of it felt significant in the moment. All of it turned out to matter enormously. Have you ever met the right person again at exactly the wrong time? Tell me your story in the comments. If you liked this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.